Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Armenians voted on Sunday in what many analysts describe as the country's most consequential election since independence. The vote comes after the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh, growing disillusionment with Russia's security guarantees, and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's push to deepen ties with the West while pursuing peace with regional neighbors. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the implications of this pivotal election is Nerses Kopalyan, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Nevada. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Pleasure to be here.
So this election is now being described as a choice between deeper ties with Europe and a return to closer relations with Russia. Do you think this is an accurate characterization?
At the geopolitical level, to a large extent, it is. Domestically, there are obviously a lot more salient issues that citizens are defining with respect to vote preference, such as the peace process, economics, social spending, social programs, healthcare, and things of that sort. But the result of these elections would indeed have geopolitical results, because if the current ruling government wins the elections, then Armenia would continue with this trajectory towards further integrations into the transatlantic system, closer ties with the United States, with the European Union, and continue its decoupling from Russia. If the pro-Russia opposition wins, then clearly that trajectory changes, because you would then have a government that is mostly going to be beholden to Moscow and therefore toe that geopolitical line. So while domestically the main issues aren't defined by global powers, the outcome of the elections with respect to who rules Armenia will determine whether Armenia continues with its Western trajectory or returns to Russia's authoritarian orbit.
Right, which makes a very interesting election to observe. We see most international media is focusing on the geopolitical aspects of it and what are the implications going forward. But like you mentioned, domestic issue, of course, like many elections, usually is the one that actually tops people's mind when it comes to going into the voting booth. Now, there's also regional tensions as well. And can you help us understand how much has Armenia's loss of Nagorno-Karabakh reshaped the political landscape and voter priorities in this particular election?
Well, most definitely. The loss of Nagorno-Karabakh led to the collapse of Armenian security architecture, which was reliant on Russia for 3 decades. It is precisely for that reason, Russia's abdication of its responsibilities as a security partner, that led to Armenia's separating itself from Russia's security architecture and, of course, pivoting away from Russia in what the government calls its policy of diversification. So it wasn't only in of itself the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh, but also after that and prior to that, actually, Azerbaijan invaded territories of sovereign Armenia, and Russia again refused to abide by its treaty obligations and completely ignored its responsibilities. So it was those developments that basically made very clear to Armenia that Russia was not a security partner or an ally, but rather Armenia had more of a sort of vassal overlord relationship, if you will. And once the security architecture collapsed, Armenia understood that it needs alternative and multiplicity of partners. And this is what the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh and the conflict persistence with Azerbaijan led Armenia to realize that the Russian model of security actually produces insecurity. And that is what led to Armenia's pivot. Domestically, the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh in essence contributed to a collective trauma. But Armenian society equates the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh as an opportunity to rebuild and to proceed with a policy of peace. Now, of course, not all of Armenian society understands what that constitutes, but there is a general understanding that stability and normalization are the first steps. And so the role of the United States, to a large extent, in stepping in and attempting and beginning the normalization process between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been very important, at least establishing de facto peace, where you no longer have shootings on the borders, you don't have any kinds of violence or aggressive behavior from Azerbaijan. So to a very large extent, Armenia is shifting its security architecture from one that was reliant on Russia, which proved to be a failure, to one that is now hinged on multiplicity of Western partners, while also some Eastern partners from India and so on and so forth, has demonstrated to Armenian society that Russia is an unreliable and a dangerous partner, if you will. So it was the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh that kind of shook and woke up an entire society who for 30 years thought Russia was its protector, but in essence ended up being a false security partner.
Right, and speaking of Russia being an unreliable partner, of course, the Kremlin is closely looking at this election as well. Even prior to the election, we've seen, be it official channels or even their propaganda channels, they've been sounding off on this election. And even during the election itself, Russia has been accused of trying to influence the election. But what concrete evidence do we know of, and how seriously should these allegations be taken?
Extremely seriously. Everybody knows, especially those who are in the security domain, have a very deep understanding of Russia's hybrid capabilities. Their capacity to initiate both low intensity and high intensity hybrid warfare is a big part of their toolkit. We've seen this in Moldova extensively, we've seen this in Romania, we've seen this also in various parts of the Western world. So Russia excels at those activities. With respect to Armenia, they in essence have amplified their approach. What is unique about the Armenia case is that while Russia continues with this misinformation campaign or information warfare, cognitive warfare, cyber attacks, and all those things that come with their activities, Russia is also initiating a bit of a culture war between Armenians of Republic of Armenia and the very large diaspora of Armenians living in Russia. And so what we have seen is extensive Russian-initiated vote-buying endeavors led by Armenian oligarchs that are beholden to the Kremlin. Somewhat what we saw in Moldova, but at a very different level. And so in this context, because of Armenia's past tutelage under Russia, most of the economic elite that at some point fled to Russia after Armenia's democratization are now being utilized by the Kremlin as instruments against Armenia's democratization or the current elections. So what you see is opaque funding, systemic vote buying on top of all the things that come with their hybrid toolkit, such as misinformation campaigns, social fracture, attempts at destabilization. Also, three of the leading opposition parties in Armenia's elections are, in essence, pro-Russia proxies. And there's a consensus on this, and they don't even hide it. The leading political party right now, or the leading political force in the opposition, is actually headed by a Kremlin-linked oligarch who it doesn't qualify to be a prime ministerial candidate in Armenia because he has dual citizenship. The Armenian constitution doesn't allow that. So we see that a Russian Armenian citizen has been sort of, from perspective of many people here, has been implanted by Russia to lead a opposition party. So a confluence of these things, from controlling or funding or influencing opposition groups loyal to Russia, to widespread corruption activities, to the various levels of misinformation, hybrid attacks, cyber attacks. So Armenia is facing waves and multi-layers of activities, subversion activities by Russia. And again, as I know, Armenia is not unique to this, but Russia has amplified that in Armenia, hoping to disrupt its democratic consolidation and produce results that are more favorable to Russian interests in the region.
Right, and speaking of pro-Russian opposition, we have seen the government arresting several opposition figures actually on the eve of the campaign. Now, how significant is the development, and what impact could it have on public trust in the election?
It has had almost no trust, loss of trust, because it's pretty much an open secret. Everybody knows that the pro-Russian opposition, some are formed by political leaders who ruled Armenia, from 1998 to 2008, and the other parties are supported by political leaders who ran Armenia from 2008 to 2018. And these were deeply corrupt regimes, which was very common in the post-Soviet space, that ruled through vote rigging, systemic vote buying, and so on and so forth. So it's an open secret in Armenia that this is how these parties parties operate. In that context, there is no surprise on behalf of much of society that such individuals are being arrested for engaging in the kind of behavior that society has been used to for a very, very long time. The difference is that those who support the pro-Russia opposition consider this kind of behavior to be normal, because that is what they've been acclimated to for 30 years. Very much what you see in various parts of Russia or Belarus or certain parts of Central Asia, where vote buying is considered to be normal to this average citizen because political culture in those societies has not sufficiently evolved as we understand it in the West or with liberal democracies. So you do have sectors of society that support not a very big chunk, but about 25 to 30% of Armenian society who do lean towards these parties. And this is where a lot of those kinds of vote buying activities happen. But the vast majority of Armenian society understands, like I said, it's an open secret in what these oligarchs do. And so in that context, it has not created any distrust towards the electoral process, because most know that many of these oligarchs or those who engage in these kinds of political activities come from the systemic model of patronalism, of oppression, of abuse of power, so on and so forth. And that is why Armenian society understands that with respect to the opposition that they are dealing with, it's no different than the previous regimes that Armenia had prior to the Velvet Revolution and its process of democratization.
All right, last but not least, we got about a minute, but really quickly, Prime Minister Pashinyan's camp prevails, which does look like the exit polls putting him very comfortably ahead. What changes can we expect in Armenia's relationship with the European Union and the United States?
Well, assuming that the Pashinyan government wins a majority, the trajectory, as I noted, will continue. If they are able to win what is known as a supermajority, constitutional majority, which would allow them to have 2/3 of the mandate in parliament and therefore implement various structural, institutional, and constitutional changes, then that would obviously enhance the reform process and speed up the relationship with the West. But in any iteration, a win by the Pashinyan government is going to continue Armenia's trajectory towards the transatlantic system and further separation from Russia in a domain of security, energy, and all those other areas that Russia uses to create leverage against its partners or neighbors.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
My pleasure.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.